Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon. Hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving and weekend. We had our first snowy day of the season here in Iowa City. Wasn't quite ready for that, but so it is. Anyhow, we have our third part to this articulation series here, function and fashion. And we spent the first two classes primarily talking about the functional aspect, a little bit of the fashion aspect or the style aspect. But we spent, the first two classes mostly speaking on the what and the how to. Last class specifically, we talked a lot about double tonguing and getting an efficient, clear, and effective, sustainable articulation going. So this part of the class is primarily focused on that fashion aspect, which is related to style. So when we talk about style, we're often thinking of elements of phrasing and nuance and line, and we tend to think of articulation more towards the technical aspect, I think. But articulation is absolutely an element of style and very, very, very important in the function, the stylistic function of a phrase as well. And of course, each era of music provides its own unique set of challenges and opportunities. One thing I wanted to comment in regards to style is in regard to, for example, staccato, legato, and note duration. They're not the same thing. So if a note is marked with staccato, for example, the indication is to play the note with separation. However, the staccato itself does not define the length of the note. For example, if there are 3 staccati notes in succession, an 8th note followed by 2 16th notes, then the 8th note staccato should have a slightly greater value in proportion to its rhythm. So I'm talking about this rhythm, right? So we don't want them to sound the same. So the 8th note should be a little bit longer, just because it's proportion, the separation is proportion to the rhythm. Legato, on the other hand, suggests connectivity, but does not have to mean a lack of definition with the tongue. So you could be, for example, playing something very connectedly, like a slur, but still giving a clear amount of definition with the tongue. So just because something is marked legato or tenuto doesn't mean that the tongue articulation can't be very clear. Now, you might not want it that way, stylistically speaking, but it doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a lack of definition. Often when a composer is using these tenuto markings or these legato markings, it does require us to play with a greater sense of sustain, but again, doesn't mean necessarily tongue in a less defined manner. Staccato also doesn't necessarily mean to use a heavier tonguing. We talked a lot about tongue pressure and getting certain kind of clarity from the way we release the tongue. But it doesn't necessarily mean to tongue always very, very hard or with like a ton of pressure. It might depend, on what you're playing. Again, we'll get more into that. And the musical style always must be taken into consideration, of course, to know how to balance the expressivity of the articulation with the proper note duration. One piece that immediately comes to mind, we'll have a look at the first movement of the Mozart G major concerto, but if we take the third movement, for example, which is a minuet, there are 3 repeated notes. Right, so we want to probably separate them a bit. It just has a kind of not a whole lot of feeling to that. Everything's kind of like a plain line, da, da, da. Conversely, if we play them too short, that sounds like quite rigid and doesn't really have either a musical feeling to it. So as this is a minuet, something like this that has a dance element to it, I think we want the feeling of movement through the notes, but with a kind of a bouncing feeling to them. So we want a certain amount of clarity on the front of the note, but we want the note itself to have sort of a vibrancy to it. Doesn't mean a vibrato, but a vibrancy that suggests the kind of a buoyancy to the note. If I again play them just kind of, those are separated, but they don't have the same feeling. It just doesn't sound very major, number one. So finding the right balance of note length and clarity is something that you, of course, want to go after. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the first movement of the Mozart G major concerto. Let me share my screen real fast. See if I can get this. Well, that wasn't wanting to agree with me. Let's try that again. Are you all seeing Mozart G major or no?
No, but this is a thing that's been happening with Zoom. If you haven't updated your Zoom recently,
Okay.
yeah, I take Spanish lessons. My Spanish teacher had the same, I don't know, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it says my screen share is, are you seeing anything on the screen
It
share?
says that it's starting screen sharing, but it's not there yet. So
Okay.
cancel it out and then try it again and just keep trying it until it works.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I didn't realize that there was that issue with Zoom. I haven't Zoomed in a couple weeks, so let's try it one more time.
They came out with a new update that like broke screen sharing.
Okay, we're gonna just keep trying this. Please bear with me. Sorry about that. Not working. Well, in any case, I'm sure you're all familiar with Mozart G major concerto first movement. So I'll maybe try again in a minute, but I don't want to spend too much time trying to work that out. So obviously, as a classical concerto, we're playing this with orchestra and primarily strings. And one thing that's really important to consider is how to match stylistically like bowings, and how a string player would go in and out with energy with a bow. So if you've ever played an orchestra, sometimes you watch the back of the second violin section and it kind of looks like they're ironing while asleep because they don't have a lot of energy. Their bow hand is moving quite slowly. And you're thinking, gosh, couldn't they have a little bit more energy there? Anyway, so, if you want a big, clear down bow with a lot of energy, that gives the note itself its length. So just as if you went down with energy, your arm would have to kind of rebound with that same energy. If you go down with slow energy, can't really rebound, right? So rebound is something that we have to think about. We can't physically see it when we play the flute, but we have to conceptualize that. That's something that's really important, is to have that feeling of rebound. So we're playing this opening. So getting a little bit of space, we don't want, completely connected and legato like that, but we want a little bit of that rebound or bounce or whatever you want to call it. Something like that. Then we have this dotted note, okay? So it's how long do we play the dotted note? How short do we play the dotted note? what style should we make that? I've heard all sorts of variations. So you might hear something really, really short. I think something in between is probably good. I think of kind of like a long eighth note with like a little rest in between the note to create the space, you know. So it's both long and short. It's long in that it has a duration, but it has a distinct space between the next articulated note. And what we really want to make sure is that fourth note, the 16th note, has a real clarity ta ta with a clear pressure on it as related to the downbeat. We don't want, you know, or the la la. It sounds like la la, but really ta ta, you know. So just that little opening gesture shows a lot about your clarity and conscientiousness in your articulation and your attention to musical detail. Going on. We have this downward scale, right? So one thing that I tend to hear very often is almost a little bit of compression in the 16th notes where we kind of clip the second dia taka, and it sounds like 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, something like that. And musically it's going in one direction, sort of like a ball rolling down a hill. So we want to make sure if we were to slur, it would have that gesture. So we want our articulation to support that gesture. Now, this is a kind of German style, right? So the articulation has to be really enunciated without being harsh, but there has to be a regularity and a clarity to it. So when we have two slurred and two articulated, we talked a little bit about this in the previous classes, it's really important that we consider how we want to treat all notes, especially the second note, which under the slur. In this case, I'm making it both long and short. So I'm playing it long, but there's a little bit of clarity at the end. And then both repeated notes are really the same duration, like vowel-wise, and the same kind of pressure on the release of the tongue itself. So they're matching. And then you hear all notes very clearly. What we might want to avoid is where it sounds all like really overly connected and sort of like it's bleeding together. That's not very indicative of that style, right? Again, we want to avoid the something that's overly clipped that gets in the way of the line moving. So primarily we want the line to flow and we want the articulation to support that line. That's very important. I'm kind of bummed out about this screen share thing because today I had all these things to share on my screen. So let me try one more time. Is that working? Okay, is it very small?
It's vertical. Are you using a computer or an iPad?
Yeah, I'm using a computer.
Can you maximize? It looks like it's a JPEG. Can you like double click the top and just make it maximize the screen?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Or it looks like maybe you're using Mac. If you go to view at the top and click full screen for that, or what are the options if it gives you? Because if you have the window on your computer smaller than your screen, it'll also appear that way on our screen.
Yeah, let's try this. Nope, that didn't work. Okay. I'm
But if
sorry.
it helps, I can see this really well. Can everyone else see it well?
Which one is this? I can't see which one it is actually, because
It's
is it
it's number 4. It's Dvorak. Yeah.
Dvorak? Okay, so what I was looking for was a Dvorak. Can everyone see it or no? Yes, okay. Sorry about that again. I didn't anticipate these difficulties today.
Can I just recommend to everyone to update their Zoom right now? Or not now. No, don't do it now because it'll cut you out of the thing. But after the meeting, update it. And then it'll help with everyone
Yeah,
after that.
sorry about that. I should update it more often, I guess. So you might be thinking, well, this solo is mostly slurred. Why are we talking about articulation? Well, I think there are some aspects of this, because it is primarily a slurred solo, there are a couple aspects related to the style that I think are quite important. And I just want to give me 1 second here. Okay, so obviously this part that's tutti with the orchestra, that's another part where we're matching the bowings, right? The style. So if we think of the energy of the bow, we don't want to play like too long or heavy there, or something very short like that. But we want sort of a, and so on. So we want something very, very clear in that manner. But in any case, I wanted to talk about the solo. Now, we have this descending line, basically. So we want to make sure, of course, that we keep our general projection up. But there are a couple things that I think we have to consider in terms of style that I think is often overlooked when we're studying this. So we have a couple of different stylistic indications here. For example, we have, let's take like the third bar. So this is an accent on the first note with a slur over the whole bar. Then we go to, which is different, and then, so we have an accent with slur, then we have an accent without a slur, and then we have a slur without an accent. So I think we want to make sure that we're making differences in those. You know, so there's kind of 3 different characters represented through these various articulation. It's easy just to kind of think of fingers and, you know, projecting it out. You know, and that kind of gets the job done, but it's kind of ignoring some of those little stylistic aspects that are in here that are important. So even when there is not a lot of tonguing per se, articulation in that sense, the articulation is still of importance in terms of how it creates the style of the piece. Okay. I'm gonna stop my share for a second. We're gonna try another one. Okay. Next one we'll go to, let's see if this works. Yes, and I don't know why this is the Copeland duo. Can everyone see that? This is the third movement of the Copeland duo for flute and piano. So this piece is like chock full of different articulation markings. And we have, for example, staccato underneath a tenuto. We have plain staccato, we have non-staccato, we have tenuto notes, we have these kind of accents, we have these kind of accents. They might happen a little later on, but we have all sorts of different articulation markings. Plus, we have sometimes we have this kind of shorter cap accent, but with a tenuto on it. So there's a lot to digest in terms of what the composer is asking of us. In this case, as we're working on a piece like this that has a lot of information in it, sometimes we resort to thinking of these articulations or even dynamics or accents or whatever markings you want to call them as like technical instructions for us. And in a way they are, but what they're really saying is this is what the listener should hear. So we always want to be thinking about the meaning behind them. And sometimes it's necessary, maybe especially if it's a new work and it's unfamiliar to you, maybe there's not even a recording of it. In this case, there are, but maybe it might be a piece like that. It's helpful to make kind of almost like a glossary of terms, in the sense that you're like, okay, in the context of this piece, this kind of accent means this. Maybe it means a little longer, it's a little more sustained. This means, I want to really use this really pungent front part of the note. A staccato with a legato means, maybe separated or bouncy, but kind of really, understanding in the context of this piece with all the information that you know about the composer and the context of the composition itself. This is how we have to kind of really start to discern certain things when we're working on an interpretation. Interpretation should always be based on information, not just like, oh, I felt it like this, so it is, That's not really the definition of interpretation when we're talking about spoken language, right? That's how people get in a lot of disagreements. I think they come up with their own meaning of things, right? Sometimes, and in these days, maybe it happens too often. But that's a topic for another day. Anyway, I think to try to get to the composer's intentions as much as possible, we can't know for sure what they exactly meant, but with the information that we have, we can try to discern that. So for example, in this Copeland, it says lively with bounce. So I'm immediately gonna think of like first entrance, coming up off of the beat, even though it's a downbeat, because to come alive, to lively, is to go up, right? You don't be alive by going down on the ground, right? So that's the opposite. So in the way I release that first note, I really want to think of having that lively bounce. And so to contrast the staccato, the staccati, it should say, I'm making the tenuto as long as possible in the sense that I don't want breaks in between the bars. So because that's going to truncate the phrase, right? It's going to chop it up. So I'm going to make the downbeats, the staccati on the downbeats, kind of a lively bounce, kind of as the ending of that tenuto note. So it creates more of a bridge in between the measures themselves. So then I get that, okay? And then we have that accent on the last note, right? It's not necessary for me to kind of stop and accent it. The accent is going to be created about how I flow into it. Then we have these accents coming in on these 16th notes. Now, if I think of just kind of a harder it's probably going to sound uncontrolled. I'm not going to hear the tone, and I'm much more likely to crack. So I'm going to think of this accent as really highlighting the fact that this comes in on the offbeat. I want to hear the note itself, so I'm going to think of sustaining into it a little bit more. And then here we have these kind of staccati with these kind of marcato accents. So I'm going to make the rhythm extra marcato, you know, even more marked and clear, even more so than the staccato before that. And then we have again a tenuto into that last accent. So that's a good example of different ways that you can, you know, think about how you want to interpret something or what the interpretation actually is to create the best effect musically. Now, if I just think of like, okay, play short, play a little longer, you know. Now, that's maybe correct, but it doesn't sound correct in terms of feeling, right? It sounds a little bit like I'm playing what's there, but it doesn't really have the intention behind it. So it's always important that we not just play the note. It's not really, again, about the staccato or about the legato. It's about the intention behind it and how it's really framing the idea of the music. Later on, down on the page, I think that's rehearsal 4, it says lighter, right, and it's mezzo piano. We have to also consider that we're in this register, which is a little tricky to project in. So to make it sound lighter, I actually might put like a little bit more vibrato on it, almost like a little fluttery vibrato. Something like that, so that it gives a contrast with which is a deeper sound. I'm going to just contrast it by using a slightly lighter, a little bit more vibrant sound, but I don't want to be so light that it sounds kind of flimsy in that register, which is one danger. And then we get into this these accents here. Again, I think because we're playing in this lower register and it's harder to produce the note itself, we really want to think of not just hitting the front of the note harder, but really sustaining a little bit more as if it were just an eighth note. And then we can highlight it that way. And then we have this very marcato, but also it has a tenuto on them. So I think we want to rhythmically very much marcate it with the articulation, but not play it too short or too dry, right? So we have to take all of this information into consideration. And this is where we might, if it's feeling like a little overwhelming, we might want to take it back into our daily exercises. We were talking about that last time. We might want to take it back to, say, Tefano and Gobert, number 1 or 2, to keep it simple, and to say, okay, I really want to work on that kind of marcato, almost tenuto. So I'm playing a little longer, like we have at, you know, this part here. So it's not a dry staccato. It has a little bit of length to it, you know, and then I might practice it in various registers. So that way that when I see it in the music, I already have a better control over it, rather than just thinking about it in the context of seeing it in the music. And then often we don't make as much discernment between the different markings. Okay, let's try another one here. Okay, are you able to see this one? Okay, so this is Piazzolla, Tango Etude number 3. And I often think when I hear people play this music, it's often perhaps the accents are overly exaggerated and it's played in an aggressive manner, and we tend to associate accents with something aggressive, and it's not always the case. Accents, if we want to have impactful accents, we really have to understand what it's highlighting exactly, and in this case it's highlighting the rhythm. So we're getting this, it's like a 6/8 feeling, da 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 da, a 6/8 plus 2, right? Rather than like really hitting it, then it doesn't really have that kind of suaveness of the tango. So we really want to bring out that feeling of, it's like a 6/8 feeling again in the rhythm. So we get something like that, right? Okay, so to help to feel that, I'm trying to play the staccato notes, the third note, right, as short and as dry as possible. Sometimes if I want to be a little extra, I might even do like kind of a little pop in there, tongue pop. But to keep it a little bit more simple, I would just keep that third note nice and light, so we really feel the 6/8 feeling. So you get the idea if I do it a little slower, right? So that's really what those accents are about. They're highlighting the fact that the meter is actually different than how it's written. He just wrote it in a 4/4 time so we could, not make it complicated, but the feeling of it is actually a 6/8 plus 2. So once again, accents don't mean, kind of hit it as hard as possible and or tongue it harder or use more air. Now that might be part of what you do to achieve the accent, but before you think about how to achieve it, we should really understand what we're trying to achieve in terms of what the composer is asking of us musically speaking. In any case, accent, we have to always think about how we get in and out, right? That's really creating the highlighted musical moment. So even at the downbeat, if you know what a slip and slide is, it's that children's game they put on the lawn and they put sprinklers on it and they run and they slide down it. It's like we have to feel like we're kind of getting a running start and then gliding into the first note. So it's not a, we start from a place of stillness, right? So and if we're able to do that, the second note kind of boomerangs right back to us. So you get that feeling. Again, if I just think of hitting it harder, it just feels very labored and not very organic. And again, it doesn't really have that feeling of the tango that we want. Sorry, hair in the mouth, not helpful. And so on, okay? So that's another example of a different kind of dance music. Okay. More.
I don't want to be too much of an imposition, but if you have all of the music up, you can press shift and share all of them at once, and only the screen that you are looking at will be shown to us. So if
Sure,
you
Zoom excerpt. I'm not expert. I'm
Oh,
not.
oh no, I'm not trying to be like a
No, no, it's
typical
okay.
person or whatever.
No, it's good. It's good. It's just that, yeah, these are all, they're not opening. Let me minimize this. They're not, it's not behaving as I want it to. Okay. Let me try one more time.
And it's not you, it's Zoom. Their new update killed everything. So
Okay. Are you seeing the Siemens Sonata? Okay, good. All right. Here's another, again, example of it's a Latin American composer, Mexican composer, and the rhythm is super important. And it's another example where we have that kind of 6/8+2 feeling. You know, to get that accent. So if we just say, it kind of locks the music up in a way that doesn't have a certain kind of freedom in the rhythm. There is a real clarity in the rhythm, but and also it doesn't project as much as we think it does. So anytime we, sorry to be funny, kind of hit it and quit it with the accent, you know, just kind of almost like we just give it a punch and back off right away. Like the impact is lost immediately. So we want to always thinking of sustaining into those accents. And that will give it a lot more impact, especially in a piece like this, which is in this middle register, which also is kind of crack city if we're not careful, right? So if we spread the air too much, okay, so we really want to really keep the sound really driven and clear. I'm trying to zoom in it with my, I'm all screwed up which device I'm on. I'm trying to zoom on with my fingers, and I have my iPad next to me here. No, can't do that. Okay. Same thing as we go down a little bit further here. It's really highlighting the rhythm primarily. You know, that's what accents are usually doing. Sometimes they're highlighting like a melodic line, you know, and there might be an accent over the note, but that just means to bring it out like melodically, not necessarily like, again, hit it harder. So I think the way to show ourselves maybe a little bit less musically sophisticated is to play a staccato like a staccato and an accent like an accent, in the sense that we just simply play it short or we simply hit it. And there's so many more options of things that we can do, again, depending on the context and the style of the music. Now, and Baroque music, say we have like a Urtext edition, we don't have any information. So that's where we have to actually have a really even deeper knowledge of the underlying harmony, so we know how to bring out certain things. Sometimes students are like, when there's a lot of information in this course, students, you're like, oh, it's overwhelming, and so many things to think about. And it's like, yes, but at least the composer provides you with exact instructions, right? If we have like an Urtext score and it's Bach or another Baroque composer, there aren't any actual stylistic indications. It's more based on really your, you know, knowledge of the harmony and understanding of the traditions of the time. So we want to be thankful to the composers that do provide us a lot of information. Sometimes it is an overkill of information and it is hard to digest if it's a very contemporary piece. Sometimes that does happen. But generally speaking, we want to be grateful for this information because they're really sharing with us, as much as possible in order to recreate the idea that they were intending. Okay. So, because this is the last part of this series on articulation, I wanted to leave some time for questions. Some of you might have joined only one of the classes, or some might have joined all three or watched them because they are available to watch later. So if anyone has any questions, I'd love to answer your questions, especially if you have any specific pieces of music that you have questions about in terms of the articulation, in terms of the function or the style. I'm happy to answer those as well. You can either throw it in the chat or you can just unmute yourself and call out your question, whichever one you're comfortable with. Does the Le Freak affect articulation? I think it helps the articulation in the sense that the intention of the Le Freak is that it's making the instrument more like if it would be one tube. Someone's wondering, Le Freak is this thing here. Without the Le Freak on, there's the overtones sort of separate from the actual sound a little bit. So the intonation, it's like makes it a little sharper, like in the overtones, it's sort of like pulling apart from the sound. So in a way, when the sound is more one unit through the tube and through the air itself, it makes a kind of a clearer target to articulate on. So I do find that the articulation is clearer in that sense, and it just projects more. I don't know if you can hear it through the microphone very well. I can try to demonstrate for you. I'll play the Mendelssohn Scherzo with and without, so obviously it's on now. Okay, and I'll take it off. So again, I don't know how much is coming across through the microphone. Probably not a whole lot. It's hard to tell, I think, in this circumstance. I can definitely tell you it feels different. Like it feels a lot more clear and responsive right away when I have it on. But I didn't do anything differently, again, and that's the thing about the Le Freak. It's not going to do anything for you. It's just going to kind of take what you're doing and kind of align it all a little bit better so it kind of reaches the listener faster. That's what I feel about it. So it kind of like removes a little bit of a barrier between the sound directly between the sound and the listener. So again, it's hard to tell, I think, through this kind of microphone, but you could probably hear it a little better if we were in person. Any other questions?
I don't have a question as much as a prompt. I've practiced a lot in damp areas, various articulations, and then performed in very bright, responsive environments, and have been quite shocked by the sounds that have come out, and have had to rely on the feeling of, what it's like to play the flute. what are your thoughts on articulation in various environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of being an artist, actually, is really being able to understand the environment you're in and be able to work with it rather than against it. When we're feeling like a negative feedback from a damp space, damp, I think you mean like dry, acoustically. Yeah. Okay. We feel
I
like,
have all of this like carpet on the walls
yeah,
in I'm in an apartment in Colombia, like literally just carpet on the walls to prevent my neighbors from hearing, and it's
yeah,
I'm comfortable with it because I do it, right?
so that's when we're getting a lot of negative feedback, like from here, we tend to push again, like push towards it. And what we need to do is go away from it. So if I'm feeling negative feedback and I start going like this with my voice, I'm like very compressing forward because I'm trying to like insist on my point. But what I really want to do is go more inside myself. So it's like when you're hearing a lot of negative feedback from the space, you have to try to hear your sound more like it's a inside your head. So if you had, I don't have books, but say these are books here. It's iPad box. But if you take two books like this and put them on both sides of your ears, you're gonna hear yourself like other people hear you. And it's gonna be so weird. And then you take, oh my God, that's so different, right? Because it's like your sound has to travel around. So I do this a lot with my students, especially when they're articulating, so they can hear how it really sounds
Wait, can I to clarify, you're putting this in front of your
in front of
ears.
my ears.
So
So it
what's coming out here has to go around and come
has to
back.
go around. So this is how you actually sound to other people. This is how you sound to yourself because you're hearing your kind of inside and outside voice simultaneously. So it's a good little experiment. And I think that especially helps with articulation because then we realize, I only hear kind of the I don't hear any sound after that, Sometimes when we kind of tongue harder or do something, it's because our mouth is so close to our ear, we think that it's projecting because we're doing something more, and it's not actually projecting out as much. Now, if it's a very live space, we have to think of it as like if we're in if like the room was filled with smoke or fog or something, it's like, how are we going to cut through that? So everything has to be more defined. It's not necessarily about short or long, but there has to be much more definition. The Daphnis and Chloe solo comes to mind when you have these repeated Bs. If you're in a very live room and you go, it's going to sound like vibrato, and that's it. It's just going to sound like you're going, wow, 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 wow. So you have to, have a lot more definition, and I'm not trying to play like as explicitly short. I'm just trying to make sure that there's a certain amount of space or clarity between each note. Does that help?
I guess my prompt was so much more on like an experience from my point of view, like the player, the person that's trying to do this thing, because it's hard to practice consistently in a room that has one feedback
Yeah,
and
and
then go perform in
I
another room. Does this make sense?
Yeah, I recommend usually if you can to my students, I tell them get into bigger rooms. Like I know your practice rooms are small and it is good to practice in a dead room from time to time, but we primarily perform in larger rooms. Sometimes it might be more dead or live, but it's good to get into bigger spaces or even outdoors, to see like when your sound is getting sucked up, like, how do you respond to that? And it's good to know how you respond in various environments in any case, and how that reacts. Okay, just do you ever use a glottal stop to articulate? Generally, if it's like I want to avoid that, if it's like a double tonguing, that's something I'm looking to avoid. I don't want but I mean, there might be a circumstance where I might do it. I won't say that I would use it in a common practice. Maybe if I'm trying to create like an extended technique or um, some other kind of like, I don't know, something like that where I want it to sound like kind of violin bow ricocheting, and then something like that. I might something like that where it's a kind of dry and breathy. So there might be an instance where it could be useful, but most of the time, the problem with the glottal stop is ta, it closes off the throat. So you don't have sound flowing through. Ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka, ta, ka, ta. So I would say generally, no. How would you describe staccato for the Mozart? Well, again, I think we have to think of it being more of something of distinction. You know, Mozart didn't really write staccati in there, and the Urtix edition, you won't see that. But we have to go again back to the language. The German language is very, very pronounced and distinct. So the notes are detached, but they're not overly short. Rather than that would just make it more ticka 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 ticka, where I'm getting more of the front and the that would be too long. So there has to be a combination of just enough length on the note that we hear the pitch very clearly, but that each articulation has a clear front and finish. Ta, ta, ka, ta, ta, ka, that are very equal to each other to create that sense of clarity and regularity that we want in this style. Something like that. So you get the idea. So I'm more thinking about being distinct and clear, and focusing in on rhythm also, because that's going to also create a certain distinction and separation of the notes. But if we're talking about staccati in the sense of the 16th notes, in that case, I would say not too short that they sound brittle or hard, but very, very clear and distinct. Great. I'm gonna make sure I got all the questions. Great. All right. Any other last minute questions? Well, you can think of them if you do. So just to kind of sum everything up, if you weren't able to join in the first two classes, they're available online on the Flute World channel for you to go back and listen to. Again, the first one we talked primarily about how articulation works, the function of it. In the second class, we talked more about practice techniques related to articulation, specifically in the double tonguing. And today, of course, we talked about that style and that fashion aspect. So I hope that when you're practicing articulation, you're thinking a little bit beyond just the repetitive sense of I have to do it so my tongue works well, right? But more in the style of language, musical language, that there's a lot of different inflection in each dialect depending on where the music comes from, what time period it comes from, kind of composer it is, what kind of musical genre it is. So articulation can provide a lot of fashion for your musical flair in that sense. Okay.
Do you have a teaser for what the next topic's gonna be?
Yeah, I think they're doing a little bit of a change up with the whole Flute World Collective, so you can stay tuned for that. So, so I think they're going to revamp some things, but But it's always a pleasure to share my ideas with everyone, and I thank you for being here today. And I hope that we get to meet again soon and talk about another topic or piece of music, maybe. And we'll see what that is. So in the meantime, I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season and a good new year if I don't see you before that. Okay, take care, everybody. Bye.